So this is a bit of an overview on Jewish beliefs regarding sexuality in general. Then we're going to look at a couple specific issues in this section, namely contraception, so Jewish views on the ethical use of contraception, and also Jewish views on homosexuality. What's important to understand for this section is that this can be a bit of a touchy subject in the Marking Centre in the HSC. We have chosen issues. We choose 3 different issues that we look at: contraception, homosexuality, and premarital sex to look at. There are other issues that we could look at, but we choose not to look at those issues because they can be perhaps a little bit more sensitive than others, and they can come across, I suppose, in the wrong way in the Marking Centre. So these are the only 3 issues that you will write about in the HSC. There's no need to look at any more issues than this, and there's no need to, I suppose, look for any more information from elsewhere for this section because it's really not needed. The information that's in here we've put together because we think it's probably the best information for you to use to help you respond to the best of your ability in the HSC. So just stick to the information that's in the book and we should be okay. So this is just an overview on Jewish views on sex in general. We just need to remember that first and foremost, from the Torah, God began to create heaven and earth and the world and all that is in it, and there was no fitter helper was found, male and female, he created them. So there's 2 quotes from the Torah. The first one's talking about the fact that God created the world and that was his will, and then he creates Eve for Adam as the fitting helper. So therefore, if we look at it that way, if the man's made in the image and likeness of God and he's created Eve for Adam and it's all his will, then sex would obviously be something that would be considered good. Human sexuality is normal and it's something that is good. We also have the first commandment from God saying, go forth and multiply. So therefore, reproduction is God's will. But if we just took it at that and we left it there, then the only reason to have sex would be, in the eyes of Judaism, would be for procreation. And if we read a bit further into some other quotes from Genesis, from the Torah, we'll see that that's not the case. We've got another quote from Genesis that says, and Adam knew his wife Eve, K-N-E-W, Adam knew his wife Eve. And what we can interpret from that is the knew has sort of a double meaning there. It's innuendo for had sex with his wife Eve, but it can also mean that he had a full relationship with her spiritually and intellectually, rather than just physically. So what it means is that he knew his wife intimately before he knew his wife sexually, if that makes sense. So we can interpret from that too something about premarital sex and promiscuity, that probably they're not going to be considered to be the most ethical of acts, I suppose, but there'll be more on that a little bit later on. Got another quote that it is not good for man to be alone or make a fitting helper for him. That's another quote from Genesis, prior to the creation of Eve by God. And what that means is we can interpret that to mean that God has created man and woman to be their own companions, to be a support and to be a friend as well. So there's more to the relationship than simply procreation. On top of this, we have other quotes from the Torah talking about things like adultery and talking about things like lust and urges and those sorts of things, and how these can be seen to be sinful and that we need to try and overcome them if we're a Jewish adherent. We've also got from Torah, it says, you shall not engage in any of the abhorrent practices and you shall not defile yourself through them. So again, we can see that through these abhorrent practices, which we can talk about a little bit later, but essentially what we're talking about here is things like incest and those sorts of things. Then you can defile yourself through engaging in those. So I suppose there is a limit. What the Torah is trying to get at is that relationships between a man and a woman who know each other and have a good relationship, then that's what's seen as being positive. And sex in this sort of context is known for Jewish adherents as a mitzvah, which it's an act compatible with holiness. It's considered a joyous, good thing. There's no inherent evilness about it. The evilness comes in when we have, or the sin comes in when we have these other contexts, which the Torah would regard as inappropriate contexts. So sex itself is fine, but it's when these other elements come into it that it stops being a mitzvah and starts being wrong and having a negative value and being a negative act. So contraception is the first issue that we're going to look at. The first thing we need to understand for contraception is that it's not contraception in general that is an issue for Jewish adherents. It's more the method of contraception that is being used. The first thing we need to go back to is Genesis 1:28, which is be fertile and increase. And from that story, from that commandment to be fertile and increase, which was given to Adam in Genesis, we come up with the notion that anything that I suppose would selfishly prevent the birth of children into a situation in which they should be born for a selfish reason would probably be considered to be a little bit negative. So something that's benefiting a couple, a married couple, I suppose, from having children for a selfish reason, would probably be considered to be considered negatively from the Jewish adherents' perspective, because that commandment is there to be fertile and increase. So that's the first thing that we need to look at. The next thing we need to look at is the fact that that commandment to go forth and multiply, to be fertile and increase, again was given only to Adam, not to Eve, and that's really important. Because what that does is really inhibit the use of contraception on behalf of the male. So if we have that notion that the commandment to the man is to be fertile and increase, that really precludes man from using any contraception at all. But on top of that, we also have another story from Genesis as well, 38:8-10, and that's a story of Onan. And I'll just quickly read through this. Then Judah said to Onan, sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. So we have a situation where a man spills his seed on the ground, and that leads to the notion of the destruction of the seed, which is seen as a selfish act. So anything that inhibits the passage of the semen can be seen as being negative. So therefore the use of condoms is generally not accepted for Jewish people as regards to that. So the other issue that we need to look at, going a little bit further forward, is that contraception in the use of condoms as a use of condoms as a contraceptive method rather has been accepted for some Reform Jews because they see it as a method of preventing the spread of disease. And the way they articulate their argument for this is that the prevention of death from certain diseases, or the prevention of illness from certain diseases, supersedes the commandment to go forth and multiply. So recapping all of this, the commandment's there to be fertile and increase, so therefore being selfish through the use of contraception in general would be frowned upon. Again, be fertile and increase was to the man. Commandment was to the man from God, to Adam from God. So therefore, anything that would stop a man from being possible to have children from the male's perspective would be frowned upon as well. However, we also have that story over now about the spilling of the seed, which means that the use of condoms is frowned upon, unless in Reform Jewish groups we have the notion where the prevention of death and illness through the use of and through the spread of disease by the use of condoms is okay, and it is considered ethically sound because the prevention of disease sort of trumps the commandment to be fertile and increase. The next thing that we'll look at is the oral contraceptive, which is the pill. Because this doesn't sort of impede the flow of semen and therefore doesn't sort of have an issue with the notion of the destruction or the spilling of the seed, then the contraceptive pill is okay to use. Also, it also overcomes the issue with the male being commanded to go forth and multiply. So the use of that contraceptive pill is considered fine for Jewish adherents. It also fits into another story from the Talmud, which is the story of the cup of roots, which was a sterility potion, and you can read about that in the book. And some modern rabbinic authorities sort of consider this to be a modern cup of roots. The contraceptive pill is a modern cup of roots which stop a woman from getting pregnant, which means men and women can have their conjugal rights to have sex together, and not spilling any seed and not causing any of the other ethical issues that might arise. So there's a bit of an overview of the two issues for contraception. So we just need to remember that it's not contraception in general that is really frowned upon. It's more the method of contraception and how that links into the Torah and the Talmud stories and commandments as well. The next sexual ethics issue for Judaism that we look at is the issue of homosexuality. This one's a little bit less sort of it's a little bit more forthright. The Torah considers homosexuality to be an abomination, and the word they use is a toveh, which is an abhorrence. And that comes from the Torah account of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah from Genesis. So it is considered to be a prohibited act for Jewish adherents, and it was traditionally seen by Jewish adherents to be punishable by death. On top of that, we have the issue from Maimonides, which is a Jewish theologian, a very famous Jewish theologian, and he suggests that homosexuality was one of the ariot, which is just a severe sexual transgression, so things like bestiality and incest, so things that you just should not do if you're a Jewish adherent. We also have a story from Deuteronomy where males who offer themselves for prostitution to other males are considered unholy, and they were called the Kadesh, Qa-Desh, so the Kadesh, that's what they were called, and they were again denounced as unholy. Lesbianism, because it's, I suppose, not the males, is considered less unholy, but it is considered to be a prohibited act and should not be engaged in as well. The other thing that I suppose we see too, and we can link this back into some of the other notions we've looked at, is that commandment to be fruitful and multiply from Genesis 1:28, because there can't be any children that can come from such a relationship. It's not supporting that commandment. It's it contravenes that Torah commandment. So therefore, it's only there as a selfish act for the couple, a momentary selfish act for the two people engaging in it, and it doesn't link in with that notion of tikkun olam, and also you could even argue that it goes against the notion of the spilling of the seed as well from the story of Anan. Because the biblical norm for Jewish adherents is to have a wife and to have a relationship and to bring children into the world, homosexuality, because it contravenes all of those aspects of it, can be seen as an expression of rebellion against biblical norm for Jewish adherents. So that's a bit of an overview for homosexuality. It is quite a short one, but you do need to understand all those areas, all those arguments. So where we see these different arguments, the Ariot, the Kadesh, that it's considered an abomination. You need to know all this sort of stuff to be able to respond in a answer to a question in the HSC for a question on Jewish sexual ethics in regards to homosexuality.